The wind moved slow that morning, like it carried memories instead of air. Dust rose in soft spirals over the prairie, and the first light of day broke through a pale mist that smelled of sage and old wood smoke. A lone rider crossed that sea of gold, young, quiet, and hollow-eyed from a night without sleep. His horse's hooves whispered over dry earth, the sound small against the open endlessness of the land. They called him the young rancher, though his ranch was little more than a stretch of borrowed ground, a few cattle, and a half-built fence that leaned like an old drunk. He was 23 and already looked older than the men who mocked him. His hands were rough, his back straight, and his words, when they came, carried the slow patience of someone who had been disappointed too early in life. The town below waited, shimmering in heat even before the sun had climbed high. Small wooden buildings lined the dusty main road. A saloon with swinging doors and laughter that always sounded sharp. A church whose bell rang crooked at noon. A handful of people who lived half in hope, half in spite. And they all knew his name, not because they admired him, but because it was easy to look down on someone who kept his head low. He came that morning to the rodeo field, where the air buzzed with bets and whiskey talk. Men leaned on the rails, spitting tobacco and stories. Women fanned themselves beneath the sun. Clyde Mercer, the loudest man in town and son of a cattle baron, was already at the center of attention. Boots polished, grin wide, voice booming over the restless horses. Clyde was everything the young rancher was not. Bold without kindness, confident without cause. When Clyde saw the quiet rider approaching, his grin stretched further. "Look who's come," he said, his voice curling like smoke. The boy with the soft hands. "Come to learn how real men ride." The laughter that followed was sharp enough to cut. The rancher said nothing. He led his horse to the rail, tied the reins gently, and stood there, dust on his boots, silence in his throat. Someone shouted, "Let him prove himself, Clyde. Give him a horse." And so they did. A wild bronco, barely broken, snorting and furious under the morning sun. The crowd began to chant, not out of belief, but for spectacle. Clyde tossed him a glance, half challenge, half amusement. The rancher looked at the horse, then at the faces. He didn't ride to please them. He rode because pride, even small and quiet, sometimes demands its say. The moment his foot touched the stirrup, the animal bucked. Dust exploded. The sound of hooves hitting ground thundered against the wooden fences. The rancher held on, once, twice, for a breath that felt like a lifetime. Then the world turned over, sky where ground should be, and he hit hard. The laughter came again, bigger this time, deeper, louder. Someone threw a hat in the air, celebrating his fall as if it were victory. He stood, slow and unsteady, his breath heavy in the chest. A cut bled above his brow. His shirt was torn at the shoulder. He looked at Clyde, who smirked like a man who'd never been humbled. The rancher gave no reply. He picked up his hat from the dust, brushed it once with his hand, and walked away. The town laughed long after he was gone. Even the wind seemed to carry their voices. By evening, he reached the small plot of land that carried his father's name. The fields were dry. The barn sagged at the corners. He knelt beside the weathered cross that marked where the old man lay. The sun was bleeding out behind the hills, and the crickets had begun their slow song. He rested his hand against the wood. "I tried, Pa," he whispered, voice cracked and low. "But maybe I ain't cut for this world of men who shout." The silence after was thick enough to touch. He sat there until the stars came out, hundreds of them cold and clear. The land stretched wide and uncaring, but somewhere beneath that stillness, a promise began to form. Not of revenge, not of pride, something quieter. He stood before dawn, shoulders heavy but eyes steady. The town had taken his dignity, but not his spirit. He saddled his horse again and rode toward the canyons where the land changed color, from gold to red, from gentle to wild. The horizon ahead was empty, yet it called to him like something that remembered his father's footsteps. Somewhere in that endless quiet, he swore he'd find a way to stand tall without shouting. The wind followed him, carrying the last echo of laughter behind, faint, fading, already forgotten. The days that followed were slow, heavy things, the kind that drag across the bones like wind over stone. The rancher rose before sunrise each morning, when the world was still gray and unshaped. He mended fences, repaired saddles, gathered stray cattle from the far edges of the land. His body healed faster than his pride, but the ache inside him stayed, steady, quiet, and alive. The sun became his only companion. It beat down on his back as he worked, burned his neck, baked the soil under his boots. At night, the stars stretched above like 1,000 watching eyes. He would lie by the fence post, chewing dry grass, listening to the coyotes call in the distance. In those hours, he felt both small and infinite, just another piece of earth breathing under the heavens. Back in town, the story of his fall grew like wildfire. Men at the saloon retold it between drinks, each adding their own twist. How he screamed, how he begged, how he'd left with tears on his face. None of it was true, but truth never stopped the tale from spreading. Clyde Mercer was the loudest storyteller of them all, laughing so hard he nearly spilled his whiskey each time he spoke the rancher's name. The sheriff listened in silence, chewing his cigar. Some said the old man pitied him. Others said he didn't care. Only one person seemed uneasy about it, Nora Lee, the schoolteacher. She'd seen how the young rancher stood that day, quiet, unbroken, even in defeat. She'd seen something in his eyes that looked a lot like dignity. She mentioned it once, softly, in the general store, but the others just waved her off. "He's not worth your thought, Miss Lee. A boy like that don't last long out here." Still, when she walked home at dusk, she found herself glancing toward the distant hills, where a single wisp of smoke sometimes rose. She wondered if he was eating, if he was lonely, if pride could keep a man warm through cold nights. A week passed. The rancher's days blended together, sweat, silence, work. His body grew stronger, his hands tougher. He began repairing the fence near the canyons, where the land dipped into deep red earth and scattered rocks glowed like embers. There, the air was different, stiller, older. It smelled of something sacred, something that remembered before men and fences. One afternoon, as he hammered a nail into a post, he felt eyes on him. He turned slow and saw shapes moving among the rocks, riders, silent and watchful. The sun caught the glint of bronze and feather, and for a moment, time stopped. They emerged, 6 men on horseback, their faces painted, their presence calm but powerful. The rancher didn't reach for his gun. He only straightened, waiting. The one in front dismounted, tall, broad, with lines of age carved deep into his skin. His eyes were the color of storm clouds. He studied the rancher a long while before speaking. "You are the son of Daniel Hale," the man said, his voice deep as riverbed stone. The rancher blinked. "I am." The man nodded once. "Your father rode with us once. Helped bury our dead when white men turned their faces away. We owe him." The rancher didn't know what to say. He remembered stories, faint things his father used to tell him before the sickness took him. Stories of friendship between ranchers and the Comanche who once ruled this land. Stories no one in town believed anymore. "I don't need owing," the rancher said finally. "I just came to work. This is my fence." The man smiled, faint and knowing. "So was your father's heart. Work, not war." They spoke little after that. But the days that followed, the warriors stayed near. They watched him work, then helped, silent, efficient kind. Together, they mended the long stretch of broken posts under the red cliffs. When he shared his bread and dried meat, they accepted it. When they built a fire, they shared their stories, slow, rhythmic, told through gesture more than words. The leader's name was Iron Elk. He carried himself like a man who remembered both peace and loss. In his presence, the rancher felt small but steady, like a stone at the base of a mountain. As the sun set one evening, Iron Elk stood beside him, both men watching the horizon. "Your people laugh at you," he said quietly, "because they do not know silence can be stronger than noise." The rancher nodded. "They think shame's the end of a man. Maybe it's just the beginning." Iron Elk's eyes softened. "You will see." That night, as the fire cracked under a blanket of stars, the warriors began a song, low, ancient, filled with the ache of old battles and lost brothers. The rancher didn't understand the words. but he felt the meaning settle into him. It wasn't a song of war. It was a song of memory. For the first time in a long while, he felt less alone. When morning came, the canyons glowed gold, and the warriors rode off to the north, leaving dust and silence behind. Before they vanished, Iron Elk turned in his saddle and raised a hand, a promise unspoken. The rancher stood for a long time watching them disappear. The prairie wind tugged at his coat. He felt something inside him shift, a quiet, gathering strength. The land was no longer empty. It had begun to remember him. And somewhere beyond the ridges, where the red rock met the sky, 300 warriors carried his father's kindness in their hearts, waiting, watching, listening for the call of dawn. The week turned like a slow wheel, each day creaking towards something unseen. The wind shifted, colder now, carrying whispers through the canyons, whispers that rode alongside the horses of men who were not quite forgotten. Down in town, the days passed as they always had. The saloon buzzed with talk, the sheriff leaned on his porch with tired eyes, and Clyde Mercer filled the silence with his own laughter. But behind that noise, a strange unease stirred. Travelers from the northern trails spoke of movement near the Red Hills, riders seen at dusk, drums echoing faint across the plains. No one could say who they were or what they wanted. The sheriff spat his cigar to the dust. Old ghost stories, he muttered. But even he glanced toward the horizon more than once that week. The morning of the rodeo came again, the same event that had birthed the town's cruel laughter 7 days before. The banners hung limp in the dry wind, the crowd smaller this time. The ranchers looked restless, and the sky, though clear, felt heavy, waiting. Clyde strutted through the field in his fine coat and polished boots, full of the confidence of a man who had never known silence. "Let's give them a show," he said. "Maybe our fallen hero will crawl back for another beating." His friends laughed, though not as loud as before. Then someone pointed east. From beyond the line of hills, a shape appeared. One horse, one rider. The young rancher. His coat was the same, but his posture was different. He rode upright, eyes forward, no shame in his face. The crowd murmured, the air tightening. Behind him, rising over the ridge like a slow dawn, came the sound of hooves. One by one, they appeared, riders in silence, hundreds of them, the sun glinting off bronze and leather, feathers catching light like sparks. They moved with the stillness of something sacred. 300 warriors, their horses lined like a river of color across the hills. The town froze. Men dropped their drinks. Women clutched children close. The sheriff whispered under his breath, "Good Lord." The rancher rode forward, calm, his shadow stretching long across the dust. The warriors did not advance. They only watched, their presence like a heartbeat behind him. He stopped at the center of town, dismounted, and stood tall. Dust settled around his boots. Every eye was on him. Clyde forced a laugh. "What's this, boy? You bring an army to win back your pride." The rancher looked at him, not angry, not proud, just steady. His voice, when it came, was soft but clear enough for every soul to hear. "You took my name and dragged it through your dirt," he said. "You made sport of what you didn't understand. I didn't come back to fight you, Clyde. I came to show you what respect looks like." He turned slightly, gesturing toward the ridge where the warriors stood. "These men remember a kindness done long before you were born. My father helped them when no one else would. They came here not for blood, but for honor. The same honor you try to laugh out of me." Silence wrapped the town like fog. Even the horses seemed to hold their breath. Clyde's smirk faltered. His voice cracked when he spoke. You think you scare me with your stories and your ghosts." The rancher stepped closer, his boots quiet in the dust. "No, fear's your own doing. I brought no threat, only truth." He stopped inches from Clyde. "You mocked me because I didn't strike back. But strength ain't in fists, Mercer. It's in standing alone and still meaning what's right." The sheriff cleared his throat, half in awe. "Son, those riders, why are they here?" The rancher looked toward the hills again. The wind brushed his hair across his forehead. "Because word travels further than laughter," he said softly. "Because kindness echoes longer than cruelty." A hush spread. Even the mocking eyes began to drop. Men who had laughed that day found the dust beneath their boots suddenly interesting. Women looked on with something like respect. Nora stood at the edge of the crowd, her eyes wide with quiet pride. For a moment, she saw in him not the boy they'd humiliated, but a man the land itself had claimed. Then from the ridge, Iron Elk raised his hand. The warriors let out a single, low cry, not of anger, but of reverence. It rolled across the valley like thunder, deep and ancient. It made the hair rise on every neck in town. Clyde stumbled back a step, his voice gone small. You could have had them destroy us. The rancher shook his head. That's not why they came. He looked around, at the faces, the town, the shame written across every man who'd laughed at him. You can tear a man down for sport, but if he stands back up with grace, the shame belongs to you. He turned then, lifting his hat in quiet farewell. I've got no more words for you. As he mounted his horse, the first light of dawn touched the town. The warriors began to move, slow, majestic, parting like a river to let him pass. He rode through them without a word, and they followed him out into the open plains, the sun spilling gold across their backs. When the dust finally settled, the townsfolk stood in silence. Clyde's hands shook at his sides. Nora wiped a tear from her cheek. The sheriff tipped his hat, murmuring, "Ain't every day a man walks with legends." And from somewhere beyond the ridge, faint but clear, came Iron Elk's voice, carried on the wind. Kindness remembers longer than pride. The town never forgot that sound. And as the last echo faded into morning, the young rancher rode toward the horizon, the laughter of men behind him replaced by something truer. Respect, born too late, but honest all the same. The days after the dawn of silence came like slow blessings. The town woke gentler, as if ashamed of its own voice. The dust still blew down the main road, but it carried something lighter now. Humility, maybe even peace. The saloon's laughter no longer carried the sting of mockery. Men spoke softer. The sheriff stopped smoking his cigar on the porch and started walking the streets again, tipping his hat at folks like it mattered. Clyde Mercer didn't show his face for weeks. Some said he left for Abilene, chasing work he'd never find. Others said he stayed just outside town, nursing the wound pride leaves when it finally breaks. The truth didn't matter. Every man has to meet his own silence someday. The rancher, meanwhile, returned to the land. His hands carried new steadiness, his eyes new calm. The earth seemed to notice. Grass grew thicker near the stream. Cattle wandered closer without fear. He rebuilt his fences, hammered each post as if it were a prayer. Sometimes at dawn, he'd look toward the canyons where the warriors had vanished and wonder if they still watched from afar. One morning, he found something at his gate, a small carving of a hawk, wings spread, its eyes painted in ochre and ash. No note, no footprint, no sound in the wind. Only that symbol, a farewell and a promise. He hung it over the fence, and it swayed gently in the breeze. Whenever the wind picked up, it made a faint wooden hum, like the whisper of a remembered song. Nora Lee came to visit sometimes, bringing bread or a book for the long evenings. She never said much, and neither did he. Their conversations were like quiet streams, small words flowing between larger silences. She'd sit on the porch while he mended a saddle or fixed a gate, and the air between them filled with something steady, something unspoken. Once, when the sun was setting and the sky burned gold and rose, she said softly, "They'll tell stories about that morning." He smiled faintly, still looking toward the horizon. "Maybe, but stories fade. The land don't." She watched him for a moment, then nodded. "Maybe both will remember. They never called it love, not in words. It grew slowly, like wildflowers that find their way through stone. It wasn't built on rescue or need, but on quiet understanding, the kind that doesn't have to be seen to be known. Seasons changed. The fields turned from gold to gray, from gray to green again. The rancher aged, not with weariness, but with peace. People stopped calling him boy. They called him Mr. Hale now, the man whose silence tamed laughter, the man the plains themselves seemed to honor. Every year, on the same morning the warriors had come, he rode out to the ridge alone. He'd stand there, hat in hand, watching the light spill over the horizon. The hawk carvings still hung by his gate when he returned. One of those mornings, as he looked over the valley, he thought of his father, of all the kindnesses that go unseen but never die. The land below shimmered in light, and he felt the truth settle deep in his chest. That gentleness is not weakness. That forgiveness is not surrender. And that sometimes the quietest souls write the loudest legacies. He whispered to the wind, "You were right, Iron Elk." The plains remember. As he rode home, the sun climbed higher, turning the sky pale and endless. The hawk above him circled once, then vanished into light. And in the town, people spoke of him in the evenings, not with pity, but with pride. Parents told their children how a man once walked back from humiliation with nothing but honesty in his hands and left a legend behind him. The story passed like a candle flame from one soul to another. It warmed what it touched. If you listen close on a still morning, they say you can still hear it. The hum of a wooden hawk swinging in the breeze, the echo of 300 hooves fading toward dawn. So remember this, friend, wherever you are tonight. If the world breaks you, do not beg to be loud. Stand to be true, for kindness remembers long after cruelty forgets. If this story of quiet strength and redemption found its way into your heart, let it live a little longer. Leave your mark below. Tell me where you're watching from, out there beneath your own sky. And if you'd ride again beside stories like this one, like and subscribe so the fire keeps burning. Out on the plains, the sun still rises for the ones who never stop standing tall.